Picture this, late at night, long after Cartoon Network's daytime lineup of kids' cartoons had ended, a strange new block of programming emerged. Instead of bright colours and familiar characters, the screen was filled with cryptic white text on a black background, as well as people in a swimming pool, and also a bunch of surreal promos that seemed designed for insomniacs and anyone who enjoyed the casual joint. This was Adult Swim, a programming experiment that began in 2001, and went on to redefine late night television and internet humour itself. Adult Swim was never just another TV block. From the beginning as a quirky experiment by the William Streets team, to its rise as a TV giant through shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and Robot Chicken, as well as Rick and Morty, the block thrived on absurdity and risk-taking shows. Its embrace of anime, experimental content and art, as well as underground music, made it the place for counterculture. At the same time, its controversies over the years, from the infamous Boston bomb scare to the fandom meltdown over fast food promotions, it's definitely cemented its reputation as unpredictable and influential. Today, we will trace the entire history of Adult Swim, from its origins as a 1990s experiment at Cartoon Network Studios, to its explosive growth in the 2000s, to its reinvention in the streaming era, and of course its lasting impact. In doing so, I will explore how Adult Swim carved out a space where weird TV could exist. And of course, it all starts in the 90s. Now, to understand Adult Swim, you have to start with Cartoon Network itself. Now, I have already talked about this in my Cartoon Network history video, but here's a quick rundown anyway. The network, of course, launched in 1992. The channel initially relied heavily on Hanna-Barbera reruns like The Flintstones and Scooby-Doo. By the late 90s, Cartoon Network then started to produce its own original programming, like Dexter's Laboratory, Powerpuff Girls, Johnny Bravo, which of course was aimed at younger audiences. And that's pretty much the network just kind of evolved based around kids, obviously. Now that's out of the way, here's where Adult Swim began to form. Behind the scenes, a group of creatives at William Street Productions, which was led by Mike Lazzo, began experimenting with different kinds of humour. The first breakout was Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which I've talked about as well in the Cartoon Network video. Many people would say that this is technically the first Adult Swim show, even though it started before Adult Swim, but the show of course was about a superhero from Hanna-Barbera's old library who would basically be a host interviewing real celebrities. All of its humour and style definitely planted the seeds what Adult Swim was going to become. At the same time, in the mid to late 90s, Cartoon Network's Toonami midnight block was testing anime late at night, introducing series like Dragon Ball Z to older audiences. So both Space Ghost and Toonami proved that there was an appetite for edgier, more experimental late night content on Cartoon Network. So on September 2nd, 2001, Cartoon Network officially launched Adult Swim as a late night block completely designed for adults. The branding was minimal. Instead of flashy graphics, the block relied on images of people in pools, as well as the bumps with just white text on black backgrounds. These bumps often directly addressed the audience. This style became part of the identity, making Adult Swim feel like a secret club. Now, before I dive into the shows, I'm aware that Adult Swim has a lot of cartoons, so forgive me for not talking about Assy McGee or Black Jesus to the same extent as others. The first show to ever air on Adult Swim was the classic Home Movies.
You act like you're insane and people will leave you alone.
You mean like what, like unstable?
Well, yeah, but more. Like overreact to something.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Alright, here's an example. Come up and brush against me. Like walk by. Ready?
Alright, how do you do?
No! No, man! No, man! No!
Home Movies aired from 1999 to 2004. The show was originally aired on UPN, and unfortunately it bombed, being one of the lowest rated shows on the network at the time. And the show was put out of its misery only 5 episodes in. Thankfully, Kaki Jones, who worked at Cartoon Network at the time, was a fan of what she saw, and pitched the show to continue through the new brand Adult Swim. Which everybody needs to appreciate this woman for allowing such a great show to continue way past obscurity. Now, Home Movies, in my opinion, is one of the most distinctive animated shows of its era. Though it never achieved mainstream ratings during its run, The series has gained a loyal following, largely due to its unique animation style, choosing squiggle vision, which is also used in shows like Dr. Katz, and its dialogue was completely improvised, and the storytelling was really heartfelt in places. The show was created by Brendan Small, Lauren Bucard or something, I don't know, and H. John Benjamin. Her movies carved out a unique space in adult animation, creating what was almost like a homemade aesthetic. The show follows 8-year-old Brendan Small, who's an aspiring filmmaker who spends a lot of his free time making amateur movies with his two friends Melissa and Jason. Now these movies that Brendan and his friends make serve as a window into Brendan's worldview, as he processes the challenge of his childhood, such as his divorced parents, his friendships, and authority figures in his life like teachers. And it's all done through the lens of Brendan's films. Her movies is powered by witty exchanges through improvised dialogue that gives the series such an organic feel. This improvised method is known as retro-scripting, and it became one of the show's most defining traits, setting it apart from the tightly scripted format of many animated comedies at the time. When you watch her movies, you feel like you're part of the show and you're taking part in the conversation. Another major element of the show's appeal is definitely its characters. Brendan's best friend Melissa and Jason are perfect forms of loyalty and chaos for Brendan's pursuits. And the best character in the show, John McGurk, who is voiced by the deadpan H. John Benjamin. He quickly became the breakout character. Coach McGurk is irresponsible, he's self-absorbed, and he's a misguided alcoholic. Yet his advice and his mentorship create some of the series' funniest moments. He truly feels like a father figure to the kids despite his own human flaws. Other supporting characters include Brendan's mum, Paula, who brings warmth to the show and makes sure that the show never strays too far from the emotional storytelling. The relationship between Brendan and his mum is healthy and comforting. We all need a mum like Paula. Now visually, her movies had to evolve over its run. Early episodes used squiggle vision, which of course is a low budget animation style in which the characters' outlines are just constantly wiggling. Now some viewers found it distracting. I personally really like squiggle vision, I just think it's really unique, and it definitely added to the series' handmade charm. But the later seasons transitioned to flash animation, giving the show a much cleaner and conventional look, while still preserving its lo-fi personality. Now beneath its humour, her movies does carry a surprising amount of weight. It subtly addresses themes of childhood insecurity, of course creative expression, and just the messy realities of growing up, which every single one of us face. Brendan's films often mirror his internal struggles, allowing the show to balance comedy with, I guess you could say, an introspection on Brendan's life. In this way, the series creates a mix of silliness and also sincerity that would later define much of Adult Swim's programming over the years. Though her movies ended after only 4 seasons, its legacy is significant. It definitely paved the way for the other comedies on Adult Swim, and it influenced the turn of later series. It also provided a huge launching pad for the careers of its creators. Now Lauren Bucard would go on to develop Bob's Burgers, which kind of brought this style of humour to a wider audience, while H. John Benjamin's voice work became iconic in both Archer and of course Bob's Burgers as well. Brendan Small didn't stop here. He later created Metalocalypse, which is another Adult Swim favourite, that showcased his talents in both comedy and music, which stay tuned because we're going to talk about that masterpiece later on. Her movies was definitely the perfect start for the network, but it wasn't the only show that was there upon launch. I've spoken about shows like Space Ghost and C-Lab and The Brak Show in my Cartoon Network video. They were all kind of existing maybe before her movies, but technically her movies is the first Adult Swim show that ever premiered under the Adult Swim banner. But little did we know, one show was going to take Adult Swim to the next level, a groundbreaking show which featured food.
Daddy?
Next door, jackass.
When Adult Swim launched in 2001, it quickly became synonymous with experimental comedy, and I think no show embodied that more than Aqua Teen Hunger Force. The show was created by Dave Willis and Matt Malaria, I think that's how you pronounce his name. The series ran for over a decade, from 2000 to 2015, with later revivals, and it became one of Adult Swim's earliest and most recognisable cartoons. Aqua Teen Hunger Force not only entertained, but it also redefined what animated TV could look like and sound like in the 2000s. The show is based around the central characters of the show, which is a milkshake named Master Shake, a box of French fries with mystical powers called Frylock, and a wad of meat called Meat Wad. They hardly fit into any traditional sitcom stereotypes. Now, the show was originally conceived as a spoof of superhero team shows, but the trio abandoned any crime-fighting premise after the first few episodes. Instead, they decided to engage in insane and often nonsensical storylines in their New Jersey neighborhood. My favorite character from the show is Carl why did they name him that? That guy, yeah. He's an abrasive middle-aged man, frequently found himself at the target of the Aqua Teen's chaos. He serves as both the foil and the victim, which I want to feel bad for Carl, but damn, him getting destroyed and hurt is just so goddamn funny. This show is an acid trip, man. I genuinely can't explain why it's so good. Maybe my brain's just fried, who knows. But what made Aqua Teen Hunger Force stand out was its deliberate rejection of sitcom stereotypes. Episodes often began with a loose setup, only then to just unravel into complete insanity, and ending without resolution or a definitive conclusion. The characters mostly just ignored the plot lines, and the conflicts escalated into surreal and often very violent conclusions. Rather than aiming just for the traditional narrative, the series embraced randomness and absurdist humour as a guiding factor. Now, stylistically, the show leaned into its low-budget aesthetic. The limited animation with static backgrounds and very simple character animation was not a criticism, it was a feature of the show. By keeping the visuals minimal, the writing and voice performances became the focal point of the cartoon. The voice actors included Dana Schneider, who voiced Master Shake, Kerry Means, who did a fantastic job as voicing Frylock, and Dave Willis, who voiced Meatwad. These three created a vocal dynamic that carried the most nonsensical scripts. The fact these guys made some fast food items become so iconic, it's definitely a testament to the talent of the voice actors. The crudeness of the animation and the humour usually felt like a middle finger to mainstream animation. Aqua Teen Hunger Force embraced chaos and definitely was chaos. Many episodes laughed at consumerism, fast food culture, and the suburban neighbourhood life, though often in very indirect ways. The sheer chaos of the villains like the Moonites, who are pixelated extraterrestrials, who taunt Earthlings with childlike insults, and the occasional dose of Moonawana. These guys just made the show's batshit crazy spirit go to the next level. The craziness of the show resonated with late night audiences, especially young adults who was drawn to content that broke rules and resisted the formula. The series also left a cultural footprint. Back in 2007, a guerrilla marketing stunt for the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie for theatres led to a bomb scare in Boston, which threw the show into mainstream headlines. Yeah, it was controversial, but the incident underscored the program's unique place in pop culture. A scrappy underground feel cartoon just out of nowhere exploded into the mainstream broader public consciousness, which I guess the term exploded is kind of funny when it's talking about this. Now, over its run, the show spawned spin-offs like Soul Quest Overdrive. It had specials, revivals, and a movie, cementing its status as one of Adult Swim's defining properties. And for its time, it was Adult Swim's most iconic show that had been produced. As Adult Swim evolved into the place for experimental animation, Aqua Teen Hunger Force is definitely up there. Aqua Teen Hunger Force helped build that reputation. It's definitely more than just a cult favourite. It proved that cartoons could just make no sense and still be enjoyable. This show was pretty groundbreaking. It turned junk food into beloved characters, and it turned complete nonsense into humour which entertained millions. By 2002, Adult Swim had already become a cult phenomenon among college students and night owls, signalling that Cartoon Network had finally tapped into a new audience. By the mid-2000s, Adult Swim was expanding rapidly. In 2004, the block became a nightly fixture. It was no longer confined to Sunday and Thursday night. At the same time, it began acquiring anime that introduced many Western viewers to Japanese animation, with shows such as Cowboy Bebop and Full Metal Alchemist. Now for many fans, this was their first exposure to anime. I know it was definitely mine. Adult Swim's role in popularising anime in the United States and elsewhere cannot be overstated. Around this time, Adult Swim also broadcast non-original shows, like King of the Hill, Futurama, and even Family Guy, which back in the 2000s was a huge reason for Family Guy's revival back in 2005. More original series started to come out, and in 2005, one of the best series premiered, The Venture Bros. The Venture Bros first premiered on Adult Swim in 2003. At first, it appeared to be a simple parody of the 1960s and 70s adventure cartoons like Jonny Quest, with very obvious and easy comparisons between the two. Yet, over its 7-season run from 2003 to 2018, the series evolved into one of the most ambitious shows in Adult Swim's history. The show was created by Jackson Public and co-written with Doc Hammer. The Venture Bros combined humour and genuinely entertaining character arcs in a way that set it apart from the largely absurdist episodic comedies that defined Adult Swim in the early days. The series follows Dr. Thaddeus, also known as Rusty Venture, who's a washed-up former boy adventurer turned into an unsuccessful scientist. He has 2 sons, Hank and Dean, and along with their alpha Johnny Bravo-like bodyguard, Brock Sampson, who's voiced by Patrick Warburton. The family encounters an endless roster of supervillains and rival adventurers. What begins as a comedic spoof of adventure tropes quickly develops into a huge exploration of failure and the complicated lives of the cast. One of the most notable things about the Venture Bros is the way that it mixes parody and comedy with real life character development, and they all have emotional weight. When the show first began, it just seemed like a straightforward joke, an old Hanna-Barbera style adventure cartoon. The show would usually poke fun at the old style of TV. But as the series went on, it became clear that there was much more happening. Characters who started out as simple spoofs grew into people with complicated lives. They had flaws and even had sympathetic qualities. I think the best example of this is Rusty Venture. At first, he appears to be nothing more than just a bitter and lazy scientist, a man who lives in the shadow of his famous father's success. But over time, the audience learns that Rusty's childhood was actually filled with pressure and exploitation. As the boy adventurer, he was forced into dangerous situations for his father's glory. Rusty never got the chance to grow up normally. These painful experiences explain much of his failure as an adult, making him not just a comedic character, but also a really tragic figure. The Monarch, who's the show's main villain, goes through a similar transformation. At first, he looks like nothing more than just a goofy character in a butterfly costume, but over the seasons, he becomes one of the richest and most entertaining characters of the show. His backstory and personal struggles make him really relatable, surprisingly. In fact, part of the charm of the Venture Bros is how it takes a character who just starts off as a joke and turns them into a layered personality that fans can actually care about and relate to. Unlike many Adult Swim shows at the time, the Venture Bros just didn't rely on the random humour and the quick gags. Instead, it actually focused on long-term storytelling. Episodes weren't just one-off. They often connected to a larger story that stretched across entire seasons. Backstories were slowly revealed, secret organisations came into play, and characters changed and grew over time. This gave the show a sense of depth and scale that was unusual for animated TV at the time, especially to be on a network like Adult Swim, which Adult Swim of course at the time was just known for crazy comedies like Aqua Teen Hunger Force. People who watched the show from the beginning were actually rewarded with a rich detailed story full of twists and turns, and payoffs which were years in the making. The animation style also added to its uniqueness. The early episodes looked fairly similar and retro, almost like all of the cartoons that the show was mocking. But as the series continued, however, the animation became more polished and cinematic. The action scenes were sharper, the designs were more detailed, and the overall presentation looked way more professional. Now, even though it kept its retro vibe, the improved visuals gave the show the ability to balance these high-stake action sequences with its usual comedy. The look of the show evolved in the same way the storytelling did. starting as a light parody and slowly becoming more complex. Themes of failure, disappointment and family run through the entire show. The Ventures themselves are a family trapped by the weight of their past. Rusty is forever stuck in his father's shadow, while his sons Hank and Dean struggle to figure out who they really are. Even characters outside of the family, like the Monarch or Dr. Girlfriend, find themselves tied down by their histories and the expectations of the world that they live in. The show makes it clear that almost everyone is dealing with the same problem, the difficulty of breaking free from the past and becoming something more than what others expect you to be. These serious themes definitely make the Venture Bros stand out. It's not just making fun of superhero stories, it's also exploring what it feels like to grow up, fail, and try again. Fans could laugh at the jokes because the show is hilarious, but they could also feel connected to the struggles of the characters, and the balance was something really rare at the time. The impact of the Venture Bros on Adult Swim in general is just huge. Like I said, early shows like Her Movies and Aqua Teen Hunger Force showed off Adult Swim's talent for weird and experimental shows, but the Venture Bros showed that the network could also handle big stories, strong characters, and it broadened Adult Swim's reputation. That it wasn't just a silly network, that there could be some thoughtful and emotional storytelling. If you haven't seen the Venture Bros, I would recommend you check it out. It is hilarious, it is so detailed, it's so deep in the topics that they discuss. It's awesome. It could be Adult Swim's maybe the best show. Controversial, not my personal favourite, but in terms of how good it is, it's definitely up there. One of my favourite things about Adult Swim at this time was its inclusion of musical artists in the midnight run. It introduced its audience to many musicians, like the Gorillaz, MF Doom, and Daft Punk. When people talk about the most recognisable shows from Adult Swim, Robot Chicken almost always comes up. The show premiered back in 2005, and it stood out because of its style and format. Other shows had original characters and stories, but Robot Chicken was just pure sketch comedy. Each episode ran for only 15 minutes, but those minutes were packed with dozens of tiny skits and parodies of pop culture. Now what made this show different wasn't just the comedy, but it was the way it was presented. The look of the show is part of its charm. Instead of being polished, Robot Chicken was a homemade, scrappy feeling show made with toys. It often looked like the kind of thing that kids might have dreamed of making in the basement, almost like Aardman on crack. Except it was done with sharp timing and a lot of professional skills. This rough around the edges style made it stand out. One of the animators is on TikTok, and people instantly recognised the animation style. It stood out that much. In a lineup filled with 2D animation, the stop motion gave Robot Chicken a completely different energy. The humour of Robot Chicken comes from its speed and unpredictability. Most sketches last only a few seconds. One moment you're watching a fake commercial, the next it's a parody of a classic cartoon. This fast pace made the show feel almost completely chaotic. But that was the point. It never lingered too long on one idea. If a joke landed, you laughed and moved on. If you didn't, you barely had any time to notice before the next one was already starting. Now parody is obviously the backbone of the series. Almost every episode tears into pop culture, whether it's movies, TV shows, comics or celebrities, nothing is too sacred or too niche. The writers of this show clearly grew up with the love of cartoons and toys, and even nerd culture. And Robot Chicken feels like their way of both celebrating it and tearing apart those memories. The show is so well known for its Star Wars sketches that Lucasfilms actually allowed them to create an official Star Wars special, something that showed how much the show resonated with fans of all ages. Even if Family Guy tried to rip it apart, those specials are good. The theme song was written by the band Primus, who is one of my personal favourite bands, who also created the theme song for South Park. Les Claypool is a bass god. Listen to the album Pork Soda after this video, genuine masterpiece. Even though it's silly and fast, there's a craft to the way that Robot Chicken is put together. Stop motion takes forever to make. Every tiny movement of every toy had to be carefully animated frame by frame. The fact that the team could make so many sketches in a single episode whilst keeping the animation consistent is very impressive. Now behind all the jokes and toy smashing, there was definitely a lot of hard work. This show also had a certain kind of freedom that matched Adult Swim's style. Robot Chicken could be loud and completely random. It fit perfectly with late night audiences who wanted something that felt unpredictable. Watching it felt like flipping through a kid's toy box, just finding random figures from different shows and movies and just putting them together. It's like the crossovers of all crossovers. One of the reasons the show lasted so long is because it kept up with the times. Over its many seasons, it continued to parody whatever was popular in course pop culture. The new superhero movie, a viral trend, a new video game, a celebrity scandal. Because the sketches were so short, the show could be very current, without having to tie itself to long storylines. It stayed fresh because it never got stuck on one idea, which reminds me a lot of how South Park rolls. They've always got their finger on the pulse of society. At the same time, Robot Chicken connected across generations. Older viewers could laugh at the nostalgic sketches, whilst the younger viewers recognised, of course, the new movies and superheroes and celebrities. This wide reach gave it an audience just beyond Adult Swim's hardcore fans. It became a cultural touchstone. It's one of those shows that you might not watch every single week, but everybody remembers a Robot Chicken sketch no matter what it is. There's something about the energy of the show that speaks to the spirit of Adult Swim. The show doesn't slow down or explain itself, and it doesn't care if every joke works or not. That sense of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks definitely matched Adult Swim's energy. The show felt like it was just made for Adult Swim, like it couldn't exist on any other network. Seth Green did an amazing job on this show, and I still find myself watching it from time to time and revisiting old sketches, especially the Super Mario one. I remember that one a lot. One of the things that made Adult Swim feel different from every other TV block wasn't just its shows, it was the bumpers. Those simple little black screens with white text or quick messages ended up being just as memorable as the cartoons themselves. There's so many videos on YouTube that has compilations of Adult Swim bumpers that people remember from over the years. They were very personal and they felt like you were eavesdropping on the network, talking directly to you. The bumpers of course were really simple. They started off as just a black background with plain white text, and some calm music playing behind it. Sometimes they would announce the next show, sometimes they would explain what was coming up later in the night, and other times they would just say something really strange. They felt like just little scribbles in somebody's notebook that just didn't make any sense. A lot of people liked how direct they were too. Instead of treating the audience like faceless viewers, the bumpers actually acted like they were speaking to us one-on-one. There was a kind of honesty to them. Where most networks were busy trying to grab your attention with crazy bumpers or even commercials advertising stuff, Adult Swim bumpers slowed everything right down. They might admit that they had to change their schedule last minute and poke fun at their own shows, or they might just put a sentence up that made no sense, but you had to just laugh anyway. It was like it was an inside joke that you quite didn't understand, but you knew something was going on. The music behind the bumpers often added to the mood. Instead of fast upbeat jingles, the background was chill ambient and lo-fi beats, which once again has become huge on YouTube as well. Over the years, the bumpers changed, but the attitude stayed the same. They played around with fan letters, showing some actual notes people had sent in, and responding in funny or blunt ways. They would often roast the fans for being picky or demanding, or other times they would be very grateful, thanking viewers for the support and acknowledging milestones. It's stuff like this that makes these bumpers and the network just so memorable. The bumpers gave Adult Swim such a good identity. The shows are all over the place and could just be found anywhere, like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, they did experiments like 12 Ounce Mouse, and of course Toonami. But all of these crazy different shows were mixed between bumpers that just glued everything together. Fans came to look forward to them too. On the surface, yeah, they were just filler, the space between shows, but they ended up carrying the same spirit as the shows themselves. The odd pacing matched the late night vibe. You weren't supposed to be rushing, you were supposed to settle into the strange universe that Adult Swim had created. Over time, the bumpers got more experimental, showing a view of a city or the countryside or something, but then it got even weirder, with such classics as The Dawn Is Your Enemy or the terrifying The Heart She Holler, the bump that scared the shit out of many kids who should have been asleep. Looking back, the bumpers might be one of the most smartest things that Adult Swim ever did. They built a brand better than most networks and huge companies could. the bumpers left such an impact that they became a TikTok trend back in 2021, with people doing certain activities to then reveal the logo afterwards. They also used the song Time Moves Slow by Bad Bad Not Good, which I guess became the modern theme song for Adult Swim. The best bumpers in my opinion though were the Christmas with MF Doom, truly classic television.
Now hold up, Slickback.
No, that's a pimp named Slickback.
That's what I said, Slickback.
No, it's a pimp named Slickback. Like a Tribe Called Quest. You say the whole thing. A pimp named Slickback.
Can we call you Slickback for short?
No, nigga, I'm a pimp named Slickback.
The Boondocks first aired on Adult Swim in 2005. It immediately felt different from almost anything else that was on the TV at the time. The Boondocks brought something sharper. It was still funny, and it was of course a cartoon, but it also came loaded with social commentary, and a point of view that you didn't see in American TV. The show was based on Aaron McGruder's comic strip of the same name. In the comics, McGruder had already been using humour to talk about race and culture in a way that mixed comedy with criticism. The TV version took the same energy and cranked it up. Suddenly, on Cartoon Network late at night, you had a cartoon about African American family, living in a mostly white suburb, tackling everything from racism to media to black culture itself. It wasn't afraid to say things that most shows avoided, and that made it stand out at the time. At the centre of the show are Huey and Riley Freeman, two brothers who were raised by their granddad Robert. Huey is the voice of reason, always serious, thoughtful and critical of the world around him, but Riley on the other hand is completely reckless, diving headfirst into trouble and nonsense. The grandpa Robert tries to hold the family together, but he is just as flawed as everyone else. Now this dynamic made the show work, because it wasn't just preaching to the audience, it was showing a different perspective from inside the same family itself. The comedy often came from exaggeration, but behind the jokes there was always a sting of truth to them. When the show mocked celebrities, it wasn't just to be mean, it was making a point about fame and money. When it made fun of politics, it was showing how ridiculous things could be. Even the most outrageous characters like Uncle Ruckus, with his definitely over-the-top self-hatred, had a purpose. He was definitely offensive, but he also reflected real attitudes that do exist. And the show made you laugh whilst you were pretty uncomfortable to the reason why you were laughing. One of the things that kept the Boondocks powerful was its willingness to push the boundaries. Some episodes sparked real controversy, not just online but in the news. Certain networks refused to rerun the episodes, and some celebrities often openly complained about being targeted. But that was part of the show's identity. It wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't watered down, and it didn't care about keeping everybody happy. For fans, that honesty was refreshing, and it proved that animation could easily tackle tough subjects. Visually, the show is just amazing. The animation was inspired by anime, with smooth fight scenes and dramatic angles, and it had a lot more detail than most comedies on Adult Swim. I keep mentioning the lo-fi kind of easy to make style of the shows. This one was completely different, the detail was insane. The animation style gave it an energy that matched the writing. When the characters argued, the animation made it feel incredibly intense. There were fights that looked like something out of a serious action show, even if the fight itself was ridiculous. The mix of sharp visuals and writing made the Boondocks feel like more than just another comedy show. The impact of the Boondocks went beyond just entertainment. It gave Adult Swim a reputation for a network that could make truly good drama shows. It brought in viewers who might not have cared about Aqua Teen Hunger Force or Robot Chicken, and they only tuned into the Boondocks because it had something to say. Of course, the show wasn't perfect. Later seasons had ups and downs, especially after Aaron McGruder left, and some fans felt like the edge was just dulled out without his hand on the writing. But even with its flaws, the Boondocks kept its reputation as one of Adult Swim's most important shows. But over on the other hand, we had SquidBillies. SquidBillies first showed up on Adult Swim in 2005. It felt like one of the strangest shows that the network had ever aired, which is saying something. The show is about a family of squids who live in the Appalachian Mountains, acting like poor small-town southerners. They drink, they fight, they argue about money, and they get into trouble pretty much every single episode. The show is crude and often gross, But underneath all of that, it's one of the sharpest parodies of American life that Adult Swim has ever put out. The main character, Orel, is a walking disaster. He is mean and he's constantly dragging his family into chaos. Most of the comedy comes from how awful he is, whether he's picking fights with his neighbours or trying to scam his way into some more money. He's not lovable in a traditional sense, but his ridiculous behaviour makes him pretty much impossible to ignore. His son Rusty is the opposite. He's weak and naive. Orel constantly insults him, but Rusty still tries to win his father's love, which creates both sad and funny moments. Then there's Granny, who might be the most unhinged character on the show. She is incredibly violent and very unpredictable, and makes things worse than they are. We see other recurring characters throughout SquidBillies like the Sheriff, Reverend, and Dan Halen, who is of course the shady businessman who pretty much owns everything in the town. Now what makes SquidBillies so unique in my opinion is how it takes on stereotypes of the rural southern life, and cranks them up to a pretty absurd level. The show tackles stuff like poverty and unemployment and crime and stuff like that. It doesn't really play it straight, it usually filters it through comedy. And of course through the lens of a drunken gun-waving squid family. It's trashy on purpose, and it exaggerates every redneck cliche till it becomes just pretty surreal. At the same time, it is clear. The creators know the culture well, and they're making fun of it, but they're also pulling directly from real small town quirks and the struggles. The humour is just so raw and unpolished, which I guess you could say fits pretty perfect with the animation style. The art style looks like it was just scribbled together on a cheap artboard, but as part of the charm, it definitely mirrors the dirty backwoods setting of the show, and the animation doesn't try to be smooth or fancy. It looks like it should be on TV at 1 AM, which is exactly where it thrived. One of my favourite things about SquidBillies is music. It's such an important part of the show. The opening theme was recorded by Billy Joe Shaver, a country music legend, and throughout the series different artists put their own spin on the theme, from Drive-By Truckers to even Lynyrd Skynyrd, one of my personal favourite bands. The show often featured southern rock and bluegrass, tying the soundtrack to its rural vibe of the story. The music, in my opinion, really grounds it to the real cultural setting. Now, like most Adult Swim shows, SquidBillies is completely episodic, with each episode focusing on some new mess Orel gets himself into. The plots don't usually matter as much as the attitude of the characters. It's all about watching these characters spiral out of control and seeing how far the writers can push the jokes, more than the focus on the actual storytelling. The show is hilarious, but beneath all the absurdity, the show deals with poverty, addiction, violence, and hopelessness in a way that's both exaggerated and actually uncomfortably real. Orel constantly drinks, he ignores his responsibilities and uses his family without a second thought. Rusty never gets the fatherly love that he wants, and Granny's constant violence hints at a just completely broken family. It's all played for laughs, but there is a grim truth underneath all of the jokes, which kind of makes you think that a show that looks like this could possibly have a deeper meaning. It's like, surely not, but it actually does. SquidBillies definitely fits into Adult Swim perfectly. It has its own identity. We've discussed shows like the Venture Bros already having some beautiful animation, but SquidBillies just completely leaned into just being cheap, nasty, and gross. It wasn't about big plots, it was about the fast comedy that did its best to try and offend people, but in a way that made them look closer at the situation. The show ran for over 13 seasons, which is longer than most people expected from something that looked like a throwaway gag. Its staying power came from its ability to constantly twist new jokes out of the same setup. Fans of the show wanted to see what the show gave them. It was the same thing pretty much, but that's why you tuned in. It's like people tuning into NASCAR just to see the crashes. It's the same thing all the time, but people want to see that. In the bigger picture of Adult Swim, SquidBillies is pretty damn important, because it shows how the network definitely wasn't afraid to lean into its own regional culture and make something extremely specific. SquidBillies is a show that would just not work on any mainstream network, but on Adult Swim at 12 or 1 AM it made perfect sense. Looking back at SquidBillies, I guess you could say the legacy of the show is that it was a cartoon that just dared to be. It turned a family of talking squids into one of the longest running Adult Swim shows, and it gave late night viewers a mix of laugh, shock, weird relatability, and especially topics about family and failure. SquidBillies is definitely a can of worms. Some people love it, but some people hate it as well, which is understandable from both ends of the spectrum. I said the show has a surprising amount of depth, but if we want to talk about shows with a lot of depth, we have to talk about Orel.
I wonder who I should talk to now. Say, that sounded like... Of course! Reverend Putty! Thanks, Mr. Creaky.
You're welcome.
Orel first aired on Adult Swim in the same year of 2005. Now on the surface of the show, it was a stop-motion parody of the old Christian kids shows like Davy and Goliath. The main character, Orel Puppington, was a wide-eyed boy growing up in a religious small town called Morrilton. Every episode seemed to start with him trying to do the right thing based on something that he heard in church or from his parents. But the way he misunderstood those lessons and the way the adults around him twisted faith into cruelty and just plain nonsense always sent him down really dark paths. The show could just seem like it's poking fun at religion. You'd see Orel trying to spread God's word through things like reanimating dead bodies, practicing dangerous forms of self-discipline, or just blindly following orders from adults who clearly didn't know what they were talking about. What makes the show work and the humour was built on the gap between Orel's innocent faith and the harsh, ugly reality of the world that's around him. It seemed like a one-note joke at first, the kind of parody that could have gotten old very quickly. But as the series went on, it revealed itself to be something much bigger and much darker than anyone expected. Instead of staying at a simple level of humour, Orel dug into the characters' personal lives and showed how broken they really were. Orel's parents, Claire and Bluberta, weren't just lazy stereotypes of strict Christians. They were deeply unhappy people trapped in a loveless marriage, and taking out their misery on each other and on their own son. The town itself wasn't just a parody. It was a suffocating place full of repression, bitterness, and just complete denial. One episode will make you laugh at the situations that Orel is trying to follow, but the next might make you uncomfortable with how much pain sits beneath the surface of these characters' lives. As the series went on, the laughs actually got fewer and fewer, and the focus shifted more towards the emotional weight of growing up in such a toxic environment. Orel himself stayed innocent and hopeful for much of the show, which made it even more painful to watch as you see him slowly realise how flawed the adults around him were. He wanted to believe that his father is a strong role model, but Claire turned out to be bitter, abusive, and unable to show any type of love. He also wanted to believe that his mother cared about him, but Bluberta was too cold and resentful to provide any comfort. He wanted to believe in the church's lessons, but the Reverend often seemed more concerned with control than kindness. The more Orel learned, the more he saw the cracks in the world that he'd completely trusted. Season 3 of Orel is where the show truly cemented its reputation. Instead of sticking to quick gags, it became a slow and painful exploration of the town and its people. Episodes would focus on one character at a time, revealing why they acted a certain way, and what kind of private misery that they carried. We saw loneliness, addiction, abuse, all shown through the lens of stop-motion animation. That looked like it should have been teaching Bible lessons to kids, but that contrast made it even more powerful. The most infamous episode is probably Nature Part 2, where Claire shoots Orel in a drunken rage. It was shocking even for Adult Swim. It was a moment where the dark undertones of the show boiled over into full-blown tragedy. From that point on, Orel was no longer just a comedy. It was one of the bleakest and most emotional series ever aired on the network. Stylistically, the show stood out completely on its own because of its stop-motion animation. Most shows on Adult Swim were 2D cartoons, often with intentionally rough or simple animation, apart from of course Robot Chicken. Orel did look old-fashioned, like something you'd stumble across on a Sunday morning kids TV. That style made the dark content hit even harder, because you never expected something so wholesome to go to the places that it did. What's interesting about Orel is how personal it feels. The creator Dinos, I can't pronounce that name, I'm sorry, has said it was inspired by his own feelings about religion, family and growing up. The show definitely had a personal touch that comes through in the writing. Even when the characters are exaggerated, they feel like they come from a real place of disappointment and regret. The show became very beloved from fans and critics, but the show didn't last as long as some of Adult Swim's other hits, ending after only 3 seasons. but its impact has definitely lingered. Fans still talk about how unexpected its turn towards drama was, and how it captured the pain of growing up in that environment. For many fans, Moral Orel remains one of the most powerful and haunting things to ever air on Adult Swim. The show had so much potential to carry on, but unfortunately the show was cancelled after 3 seasons. Many points of the episode alone for this situation. The episode itself is often even blamed by Dino for being the final nail in the coffin for the series. As he puts it, he was told the series was getting way too depressing by executives at Adult Swim, leading to the ending of the show. I'd really recommend this show as there is so much lore that I simply cannot just cover all of it in this video alone. If you want to know more about this show, there was a great video by Jay Latner about the entire series. Check that out, he nails it with everything about this show, because it is just so good that I genuinely can't say everything in this video. Moral Orel was very bleak and sad, but this show was on the other end of the spectrum. It was the new show created by her movies creator Brendan Small. It was chaotic, it was loud, and it was brutal. And of course I'm talking about Metalocalypse.
Alright, I get it, fine. You're all without fathers, alright?
I'm not. Fucking love my dad. My dad's fucking awesome.
Metalocalypse first premiered in 2006, and the show came in with a different kind of energy. It was loud, bloody, and devoted to one thing: heavy metal. It managed to be both a parody of the genre, but also a love letter to it, combining comedy with real music that metal fans actually really respected. The series revolves around Dethklok, a band which I guess you could say the entire world seems to revolve around. In the universe of the show, they're not just a band, they're the biggest cultural force on the planet. Their albums crash economies, their products dominate markets, and their concerts regularly end in mass death. But fans don't mind though. They treat Dethklok like gods, willing to risk their lives just to see them play. The band is essentially a global corporation, which is bigger than most governments, which that's part of the joke. They're way too powerful, but they're too dumb to handle it. Each member of the band brings their own unique taste that makes them special. Nathan Explosion is the frontman, and he's obsessed with making everything brutal. His deep voice and outlook give him an aura of power, but in reality he's pretty socially awkward and not much of a thinker. He sees the world through the lens of death, destruction, and whether something is too metal or not. Then there's Swizgar. He's a Swedish lead guitarist who constantly brags about being the fastest player alive. Man can even rival Yngwie Malmsteen. He looks down on everyone around him, and his broken English only adds to how ridiculous his character is. Of course, Turkey Wartooth as well, he's the rhythm guitarist. He's sweet and childlike, and he's often the butt of the band's jokes, and he seems permanently stuck in a kind of Arrested Development. His innocence contrasts with the brutality of the band, makes his character both funny and sad. Then of course there's William Murderface, who is the bassist of the band. He is bitter and constantly lashing out. He hates himself and everyone else, making him the most miserable member of the group. A lot of the humour comes from just how pathetic and self-destructive he is. Pickles, the drummer, is an Irish-American burnout, but he's the most down-to-earth member, though that's not saying that much. He's usually drunk or high, and while he tries to hold things together, he often gets dragged into the chaos with the rest of the band. Together they form a band that is both unstoppable and completely dysfunctional. Their concerts kill fans by the thousands, and yet they remain beloved worldwide. The contrast between their godlike influence and their idiotic behaviour really ties the show together. What I love about Metalocalypse the most is the way it treats music. Brendan Small, the creator of the show, is of course a musician himself, and he made sure that Dethklok songs were more than just throwaway novelty music. They're fully produced heavy and brutal tracks that could easily pass as just real metal songs. In fact, they did. Dethklok existed outside of the cartoon, releasing multiple albums, the Death Album 1, 2 and 3, and even touring with live shows that combine the band's animated visuals with live musicians. The crossover between fiction and reality gave the show a completely unique authenticity. The humour of the show definitely comes from a lot of music stereotypes. Metal bands really do have egos, sometimes strange fan bases, and definitely bizarre publicity stunts, and Metalocalypse just pushed all of that to absurd levels. The show did have a deeper meaning which was really cool. The Tribunal, who is a secret organisation that monitors Death Clock, believes that the band is tied to an ancient prophecy. Now this subplot, which definitely runs quietly in the background for most of the series, adds a strange seriousness to what is otherwise a bloody comedy. The band isn't just a group of musicians, they're part of something way bigger. The animation is also beautiful in this show. It looks sharp and detailed. The concert scenes have real energy with flashing lights, pyrotechnics, and the crowds are just full of screaming fans. The fight scenes were choreographed like something out of anime, and the gore was so extreme that it ended up circling just back to being funny. The show's shock value is definitely on full display. Characters are sliced in half, crushed, burned alive, in ways that are definitely animated, but some people would find quite shocking to see. I personally don't, I think it's hilarious. Now culturally, Metalocalypse left a huge mark. It was completely unlike anything else. The music side of it really brought the show to life. Fans stuck with this show even after it ended back in 2013, constantly pushing for a final conclusion. Years of petitions and online campaigns finally paid off, with Metalocalypse Army of the Doomstar back in 2023, which wrapped up the band's story. The fact that people waited a decade for closure says everything about how strong the series connected with the audience. The 2000s was one of Adult Swim's most beloved eras. The shows were powerful and the variety was unmatched. In 2007, Adult Swim announced it would expand to 7 nights a week and begin airing at the start time of 10 PM every single night. They started this off with reruns of King of the Hill, which what more could you ask for? On December 27th, 2010, Adult Swim then moved its start time from 10 to 9, extending the network's schedule to 9 hours. As the internet culture exploded in the 2010s, Adult Swim adapted seamlessly. The Adult Swim singles program launched in 2010, releasing free tracks from underground and mainstream musicians like Flying Lotus, Thundercat, and This cemented Adult Swim as not only a hub for comedy, but also for experimental music. Online, Adult Swim cultivated a reputation for viral content. Short films, web exclusives, and surreal promos spread rapidly through YouTube and early social media. The block's bizarre humour aligned perfectly with meme culture. Now in 2013, Adult Swim struck gold with a new show that broke through the cult following of previous ones, and became one of the network's most popular cartoons of all time. That's right, it's time to discuss Rick and Morty.
I'm stating the fact that if I had used this microscope, it would have made me mentally retarded.
Okay, yeah, but I don't think it's about logic, Rick. I think the word has just become a symbolic issue for powerful groups that feel like they're doing the right thing.
Well, that's retarded.
Now let's get the controversy out of the way first. I do not like Rick and Morty. You can now hate me in the comments, I just don't find it that good. But I do respect the show, and I do respect what it's done. It's brought Adult Swim to new heights, so let's dive in. Rick and Morty started as a weird side project. It was co-created by Dan Harmon, who was already known for Community, and Justin Roiland, who had been knocking around the animation world with his crazy voice work and his crude internet shorts. Now the pitch sounded simple enough. A parody of the Back to the Future movies with a mad scientist and his dim-witted grandson, going on space and dimension-hopping adventures. But almost immediately, it became clear that the show was doing something different. At first glance, the draw was the humour. The pilot sets the tone perfectly. Rick is drunk, drooling, and immoral, while Morty is stammering, terrified, and forced along for the ride. Each episode escalates the insanity. Bizarre alien planets, interdimensional cable TV, Cronenberg-style mutations, and constant self-awareness about how the stories are being told. The jokes are pretty filthy and shamelessly nihilistic, something that set Rick and Morty apart. It wasn't random, the show had real science fiction ideas baked into the comedy, and it cared about the consequences in a way that most adult cartoons didn't. You could say that the seriousness is what hooked people. By the end of the first season, Rick and Morty had already proven that it could balance dumb jokes about fighting aliens with depressing moments. The Cronenberg episode didn't just reset itself at the end. Rick and Morty abandoned their ruined dimension and moved into another one, burying their own corpses in the backyard. That single scene showed fans that this series wasn't going to hit the reset button just like The Simpsons or Family Guy. Actions carried weight. Rick's cynicism wasn't just a joke, it was a philosophy. The fandom picked up on that fast. By season 2, Rick and Morty had grown from a late night cult hit to a mainstream phenomenon, something that Adult Swim definitely hadn't seen before. Adult Swim heavily promoted this show, streaming episodes online for free, and clips started going viral. People weren't just laughing at the catchphrases, they were completely going insane over them. The amount of times I heard people say wubba lubba dub dub, it wasn't funny, it was annoying. Jesus Christ, why did everybody say it? They were also obsessing over the show's hidden depth. Threads popped up on Reddit and 4chan dissecting tiny background details. Fan theories flourished about the multiverse and different versions of Rick, and people began treating the show like a puzzle box. The combination of humour with intellectual sheen gave Rick and Morty a unique place in pop culture. Fans who loved science fiction and dark comedy could meet in the middle, and the internet amplified everything. Memes spread across social media, cosplays became common at conventions, and episodes like Total Recall or Pickle Rick became cultural events. At its peak, Rick and Morty was being treated less like an animated sitcom and more like a pop culture juggernaut. But when any show breaks into the mainstream, the fandom started to get a reputation. Some fans, especially online, leaned too hard into the idea that Rick and Morty was for smarter audience members, treating it like a badge of intellectual superiority. Now, the infamous "to understand Rick and Morty you need a high IQ" copypasta was originally a joke, but it captured something real about how obnoxious certain parts of the fanbase could be. The Szechuan sauce debacle in 2017, when McDonald's briefly brought back the dipping sauce as a tie-in, only to be just mobbed by angry fans demanding more. It was absolutely insane, it was all over the news and everything, over a fucking sauce from McDonald's. It cemented the idea that Rick and Morty fans were loud, entitled, and sometimes pretty unhinged. And the show became a symbol of both creative brilliance, but it had a toxic fandom at the same time. This isn't me attacking you guys if you like Rick and Morty, just the overall fan base and what people were seeing around this time was pretty crazy. But through all of this, the show itself continued to grow. The animation got cleaner, the writing was more ambitious, and the sci-fi more layered themes. Like most shows, Rick and Morty then started to add emotional depth, especially in episodes like Rick-Lantis Mix-Up, which expanded the mythology into something resembling, I guess you could say, a multiverse saga, before it was done to death. The show became self-aware about its own hype, sometimes mocking fans directly for just over-analysing or idolising Rick. But despite these jokes, it couldn't shake the fact that a lot of people really did idolise Rick. For some viewers, he was a tragic figure, exposing the emptiness of existence. For others, he was just the smartest guy in the room, who didn't care about rules, so that made him cool. Which, I mean, he's just an alcoholic and he's kind of abusive. Maybe he's not the best role model. The show grew and grew, but behind the scenes, things were messier. Dan Harmon was always open about his struggles with alcohol and perfectionism, which sometimes slowed production down. Which is something that I can definitely agree with when it comes to making these videos. Perfectionism is just so goddamn annoying because no matter how hard I try, my videos are just not good enough for me. But that's why it takes me so long. But the bigger storm came from Justin Roiland. Roiland voiced both Rick and Morty, and his slayed improvised delivery became part of the show's identity. For a long time, fans just saw him as the goofy guy who voiced both of their favourite characters. But over time, reports started surfacing about him, being unreliable in the writer's room, showing up less often, and being more focused on pitching new projects than working on Rick and Morty, which included the Rick and Morty anime, which, yeah, it's terrible, it's fucking shit. Then, in 2023, the controversy broke wide open. Justin Roiland was charged with domestic violence. Although the charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence, reporting from outlets like The Hollywood Reporter revealed disturbing allegations about his behaviour, including inappropriate messages to fans, abusive workplace conduct, and just general dysfunction behind the scenes. Adult Swim quickly severed ties with him, announcing that Rick and Morty would continue but without Roiland, and that new voice actors would take over from his roles, which Adult Swim did the right thing. You can't have a guy who's just being that much of an ass on your show. This put the show at a crossroads. On one hand, Roiland's voices were so tied to the characters that many fans couldn't imagine the show without them. But on the other hand, most of the actual writing had long been handled by a large team that was led by Harmon, and other showrunners. Roiland's departure raised questions about the authorship, about whether his comedic style was really central anymore, or if he had already drifted from the creative core years earlier. But what is remarkable is that despite all the chaos, the toxic fandom moments, the constant production delays, the departure of a co-creator, Rick and Morty has remained a flagship show for Adult Swim. It's one of the rare animated series that broke fully into mainstream pop culture, while still keeping its surreal and cynical edge. People who have never watched it will recognise Pickle Rick, which is unfortunate. But at the same time, it's also a cautionary tale. The very things that made Rick and Morty explode, the too smart for you humour, the idolisation of Rick, the cult-like fandom, also fueled some of its ugliest moments. Behind the scenes problems with Roiland show how fragile even the biggest hits can be, especially when they're tied to volatile personalities. For fans, the show represented both the heights of modern animation and also the pitfalls of internet-driven fandom culture. But even if you think that you are smart for watching this and this is the greatest thing and it's so much better than any other show that exists, Rick and Morty is just a cartoon.
Which it is.
Around the same time as Rick and Morty, we also saw the Eric Andre show, and it is one of the most chaotic programs to ever air on TV. It premiered in 2012, and it was created by the comedian Eric Andre, who also serves as its host. The show is a joke on traditional late night talk shows. It includes familiar elements like celebrity interviews, musical guests, and a sidekick, which is the comedian Hannibal Buress. For the first 4 seasons, its execution is completely unhinged, and it blurs the lines between comedy and performance art. The set itself is deliberately just cheap and unstable. It was often destroyed during Andre's opening monologues. These chaotic beginnings set the tone for each episode. The interviews were frequently derailed by bizarre questions and confusing pranks, which definitely unsettled both the guest and the viewers. The show has such an awkward vibe around it. When Eric does certain things, you just sit there and cringe, but it's so funny because, hey, this guy does it, so the best part is you don't have to do it yourself. Outside the studio, the show is also known for its street pranks. Andre takes his show to public spaces, interacting with unsuspecting bystanders, in ways that range from silly to deliberately shocking. The show is very reminiscent of the early Jackass series on MTV, but it puts its own spin on it that makes it way more unpredictable. Eric Andre was also in Jackass too, so I guess that's a full circle. Now, Adult Swim has a lot of shows, so I'd like to do a rapid fire round of some of the shows that I missed, and just talk about them for a brief moment, such as Xavier Renegade Angel. This show aired from 2007 to 2009 and was created by Vernon Chapman and John Lee. It follows the misadventures of Xavier, who is a bizarre, deformed wanderer with a beak for a nose, backwards knees like a horse, and a snake for an arm, and also a relentless thirst for his spiritual enlightenment. The show is a parody of both New Age philosophy and classic hero's journey storytelling. Each episode finds Xavier travelling through strange, distorted worlds where he tries to help people by offering misguided wisdom. However, his arrogance, misunderstanding of reality, and misuse of philosophy often lead him to disastrous consequences. Instead of solving problems, Xavier always makes them worse. And the animation, it looks like a really bad PS2 game, but that just makes it even better. 12 Ounce Mouse was created by Matt Malaria, and it first aired in 2005, and stood out for its terrible animation. The characters are drawn like just rough doodles, moving very stiffly against a simple white background. It looks like it's made on MS Paint. Now, the show follows Mouse Fitzgerald, who is an alcoholic mouse who takes on shady jobs and goes on bizarre adventures about identity and paranoia. This show is one of those ones that you just put in the background and question what the hell you're doing with your life, but it's certainly worth checking out. Mr. Pickles aired from 2014 to 2019, which, fun fact, my pet snake is also called Mr. Pickle. It was created by Will Carsola and Dave Stewart. It's centered on the Goodman family and their seemingly friendly border collie, Mr. Pickles. Now, on the surface, he's a loyal pet, but he's actually a sadistic, satanic dog with a hidden underground lair, filled with torture devices, occult symbols, and even victims. The show plays with the contrast between the wholesome imagery of a small town family with the over-the-top violence and depravity caused by Mr. Pickles. Each episode usually follows the Goodmans, especially their young son Tommy, going about their lives, while Mr. Pickles secretly commits graphic murders and bizarre rituals, and the only person who knows the truth is Grandpa Goodman. But because no one believes him, he's just dismissed as a crazy old man. The phrase 666 good boy became a catchphrase tied to the series. It reflected the central joke, that Mr. Pickles is both a loyal good boy in the traditional dog sense and a satanic force tied to the number 666. The humour is intentionally shocking and it leans heavily on gore and satanic imagery. So it may not be for everybody, but I find the show to be kind of funny because it is just so absurd and all over the place. I can't help but enjoy it. Fish Sent Alive was one of Adult Swim's strangest and most original shows. It ran for 6 years from 2014 to 2020. And it started as a parody, I guess you could say, of sports talk call-in shows. But instead of discussing athletes or games, the contestants were tropical fish, swimming around in the tank. Each episode featured a live broadcast of a fish tank, overlaid with graphics, games, and a point system that assigned scores to the fish based on their movements. The hosts of the show, including Dave Bonowitz, Andrew Choey, Matt Harrigan, and Max Simonet, treated the fish like celebrity athletes, providing play-by-play commentary and interviews with viewers who called in. While the fish just swam aimlessly, the humans built narratives around them, giving the animals personalities and rivalries. Over the time, fan favourites actually emerged, and the voting system allowed viewers to influence the outcome of matches of the weekly competitions. The longer you watched, the more invested you became in the fates of these fish, and the odd community that formed around them. The show even featured live musical performances and guest appearances from bands and comedians. Now, if I didn't talk about a show you love in enough detail, I am planning to go into depth with a lot of Adult Swim shows like I did with my Rocco video. So if I didn't talk about Aqua Teen enough or Venture Bros enough, because I didn't, because there's so much I could say about all of those shows, separate videos will be coming out soon, so yeah, stay tuned for that. In 2017, we saw one of the most beloved Cartoon Network shows return with a more edgy, darker turn to it, which was none other than Samurai Jack. The show had ended without closure, leaving Jack stuck in the future, unable to defeat Aku. More than a decade later, the creator Genndy Tartakovsky brought this series back for a 5th and final season on Adult Swim's Toonami block. The show had very mixed reviews. Some people loved it, whilst others really was not impressed and was quite disappointed. But it's definitely without saying that the new season had a darker and more mature turn. 50 years had passed, and Jack hadn't aged thanks to being lost in time. He was stripped of his magic sword and haunted by visions of the failure. He had grown weary and hopeless. The story followed him as he tried to reclaim his purpose while battling Aku's forces, including a group of deadly assassins known as the Daughters of Aku. Now, what stood out was how different the revival felt compared to the earlier season. The original series had an episodic, mythical quality, with long stretches of silence and stylized action. The 2017 season was more serialized, telling one continuous story that built towards closure. It explored Jack's trauma, it explored his guilt and his loneliness, adding a weight that resonated with both long-time fans and newer fans of the show. I won't go into what happens at the end because it's definitely worth you guys checking out. But Genndy also created Primal in 2019, which is one of Genndy's most ambitious projects. This show is so different because it has no dialogue at all, and it relies entirely on visuals and sound and music to tell its story. The result is a brutal, emotional, and a surprisingly moving tale set in the prehistoric world. The series follows Spear, who is a caveman who suffers the loss of his family due to a pack of dinosaurs, and in the aftermath of that tragedy, he forms an unlikely bond with Fang, who is a female Tyrannosaurus, who has also lost her offspring. They both seem like enemies at first, filled with grief and rage, but their shared pain draws them together. From then on, the series becomes about survival in a savage, unforgiving world, as the two travel across hostile landscapes, fighting predators and beasts and even other humans. What makes Primal stand out is its pure storytelling style. There is no dialogue. Characters will grunt, roar and scream, but words are definitely not needed. The animation does the talking. The expressions, the body language, the environment carry the weight of the story. Each episode feels like a mini film, with Tartakovsky using silence and pacing as much as he uses action. By the end, the series delivers a conclusion that is tragic and powerful, and it definitely cements itself as just one of Tartakovsky's, I guess you could say maybe his magnum opus maybe. It is so good. In 2019, Mike Lazar, the man who was responsible for Adult Swim, retired. The 2020s seemed to be a new and unsure time for the network. Mass layoffs occurred due to the pandemic, and apart from Rick and Morty, the network wasn't doing that much. But in 2022, Adult Swim once again struck gold, with the debut of Smiling Frenz. The show was created by Michael Cusack and Zach Adell, that quickly became a standout after its 2020 pilot. The full season started in 2022, and the show follows Pim and Charlie, who are two employees of a small company whose job it is to make people smile. But the way they go about it is definitely not straightforward or successful. Pim is definitely overly optimistic and eager to help, while Charlie is definitely more cynical and reluctant. And I just love the duo so much, they just work so well. One of my favourite cartoon duos since SpongeBob and Patrick, I think. Episodes usually start with a simple call for help, and then just spiral into just batshit craziness. The animation that is used is pretty simple, but it also has a mix of different styles that make the show just look so interesting and brand new. Now, Zach Adell was a big internet animator back in the day. He went under the name Psychic Pebbles, whose style matched the nostalgic Newgrounds style of the early to mid 2000s. The stories swing from wholesome to disturbing without warning, whether it's dragging a depressed man through the town to Daveland, or dealing with Mr. Frog, or sending Charlie to hell, where he just casually talks with Satan. Around the two main guys, Pim and Charlie, there is just a cast of strange characters, like Mr. Boss, Alan, and Glep. What makes the show click is its mix of internet-born humour with Adult Swim's traditional late-night weirdness. It does remind me of something that I would watch when I was like 10 years old on Newgrounds, and I think that's why I love the show so much. Season 3 is coming out very soon, which I guess by the time this comes out it would have already been released, so hopefully it's good. I'm hoping it is. Let's just put a little card here to say if it was good or not. Adult Swim continued their momentum, and they created one of my all-time favourite animated shows this year, with the release of Common Side Effects. The show debuted on February 2nd of 2025 and was created by Joe Burnett and Steve Healy, with executive producer like Mike Judge and Greg Daniels in the mix. You know it was gonna be good. It stars the character Marshall Cuser, who's a mycologist and discovers a bizarre mushroom called the Blue Angel. He finds it in Peru and it can miraculously cure any illness, including things like bullet wounds and even dementia. Marshall then learns the hard way that the healing powers and Big Pharma don't mix. He demonstrates how good the mushroom is by breaking a pigeon's neck and immediately healing it with the fungus seconds later. He teams up with his former high school lab partner, Frances Applewhite, and she's working under the CEO of a huge pharmaceutical company, though she hides that from Marshall when they reconnect. From there, it's just chaos. Marshall's goal is to make the mushroom available for free to everybody, but Big Pharma and the DEA and the shady businessmen chase him down to keep that under wraps. Critics have been loving this show. Many praise it for its visually interesting animation. The show, I guess you could say, is a conspiracy theory show. It focuses and critiques healthcare systems. Also, I love Socrates the turtle. I want him in my house. He's just the best. The show was so well received, it has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes too, which is truly deserved. And season 2 is on the way. If you guys haven't seen this show, out of everything I've recommended in this video, this is the show that you need to check out the most. It is just unbelievable. I watched one episode and then I binged the rest straight away because it was that addicting and that interesting to just watch and see the story unravel. The 2020s feels almost like Adult Swim's dominant stage again, with more airtime than ever. Most people tune into Adult Swim now more than Cartoon Network, which we talked about in the Cartoon Network video, how all that's going. So Adult Swim is kind of definitely doing better than Cartoon Network now. Adult Swim has always been a strange place on TV, and maybe that's why it's lasted. When it first started in 2001, it didn't feel like it was trying to compete with other networks or copy trends. It was carving out a corner on late night TV where the rules were bent or just completely ignored. The block grew out of Cartoon Network's off hours, but it quickly became something bigger. A space for creators to throw out experimental parodies and just raw ideas that would not have survived anywhere else. Over the years it gave us crazy shows like the Eric Andre Show, Xavier Renegade Angel, Smiling Friends, Primal, Samurai Jack, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, 12 Ounce Mouse. It gave us so much, and it continues to give us so much too. These shows became cult classics because Adult Swim let them be exactly what they were. What really makes Adult Swim's history stand out is how much it trusted the audience to get it. Sometimes that meant 10 minutes of nonsense, or sometimes it meant brutally violent action. It wasn't polished in the way that TV was supposed to be. Its roughness became its signature. Even the bumps, the weird little cards with deadpan text, built this sense that the whole block was alive and speaking directly to all the insomniacs at 2 AM. By the 2010s, Adult Swim had already changed television. It had influenced the internet humour. It gave rise to shows like Rick and Morty that broke out into the mainstream, and still kept space for oddball experiments like Fish Sent Alive. And even now, it hasn't really stopped being unpredictable. That may be the best way to think of its legacy. It kept the weird alive. If you look back on it all, the network doesn't add up to one neat category of shows or style. It's a patchwork for the absurd, the grotesque and the heartfelt. It taught people that animation wasn't a genre, it was an art form, and it could be for anybody. So if you had to sum up Adult Swim's history, it wouldn't be about the hits or ratings or cultural milestones. It would be about the feeling of stumbling across it late at night, not knowing exactly what you were watching, but you were being pulled in anyway. It's the memory of a block of television that never tried to explain itself. It never apologised for being too weird, and never stopped surprising the people willing to stay up and give it a watch. And ladies and gentlemen, that was the full history of Adult Swim. This is the longest video I have ever made. There's been so much work that has gone into this, so much research, but also so much nostalgia. Watching those early shows like her movies and Aqua Teen Hunger Force, it was so nostalgic to me to go back and watch those, but I also found some really good gems that I'd never really given the chance to sit and watch. I just want to say as well, if you've made it this far, thank you so much. I don't expect people to still be here at this point, because this video has gone on, and hearing my voice for an hour and a half must have been torture. Thank you all so much for the support. 100,000 views on the Rocco video is just insane. Absolutely insane. I can't thank you enough for that. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and happy Halloween too. And I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.